The storm outside had not yet broken, but Lily Harper could feel it brewing in her chest long before the clouds shifted. It had been for years since she had last seen Daniel Black, the man who had once promised her the kind of forever that children believe in. She remembered his smile, the confidence in his step, and the warmth in his voice that could disarm even the coldest of days. But most of all, she remembered the moment his eyes hardened, the moment his ambitions swallowed the tenderness they once held for her. That was the day she learned that love could be as fragile as glass, beautiful in its shine, but quick to shatter in the grip of greed. She hadn't cried in front of him, not when his words pierced deeper than any blade could. He had spoken, with a strange calmness, as though rehearsed, as though breaking her heart was nothing more than a line in a script he had already memorized. He had said they were not right for each other, that his future demanded sacrifices. As she was one of them, she had wanted to scream, to claw at the wall between them, to make him see what she carried inside her, but pride sealed her lips shut. She turned away, her silence her only defense, though inside she was crumbling piece by piece. That night, when she returned to her apartment, the room seemed smaller, the air heavier. She sat on the floor with her arms wrapped around herself, willing the pain to ebb. But grief has its own rhythm and pays no mind to desperate wishes. It was in that silence she promised herself that she would never beg. She would never let him see her broken if he thought she was dispensable. Then she would leave without giving him the satisfaction of knowing how wrong he was. The weeks that followed were a blur of confusion, but everything sharpened into unbearable clarity the day she sat in the doctor's office, her hands cold and trembling. The news came like thunder. Not one child, not two, but 3, triplets. For several moments she thought her ears had betrayed her, that the words spoken were impossible. She remembered staring at the monitor, the shapes flickering in black and white, 3 fragile miracles forming inside her. Her throat tightened, her vision blurred, and she clutched her stomach as if holding on to the very reason she could not fall apart. Fear weighed down on her. How could she, alone and abandoned, raise 3 children? She had no fortune, no safety net, no partner to share the sleepless nights and the uncertain future. Yet with that fear came something stronger, a resolve she never knew she had. She would do it. She would protect them. If Daniel believed that love was something to discard in pursuit of power, then she would show the world that real strength came not from building empires of glass and steel, but from building a family on nothing more than faith and courage. The following months tested her more than she thought possible. She worked hours that stretched into exhaustion, taking whatever jobs would keep a roof over her head and food on the table. There were nights she would collapse onto her bed, her swollen body aching, tears slipping down her face when no one was there to see. But even in her weakest moments, she would lay her hand over her belly, feel the gentle movements within, and find the courage to rise again. She whispered promises to them in the quiet hours of the night, promises that she would fight for them, protect them, and never let them feel abandoned the way she had been. The day her children came into the world was the day she realized just how limitless a mother's love could be. The cries of 3 tiny voices filled the room, fragile yet fierce, and she wept with both joy and terror. Joy that they were here, perfect and alive. Terror that she was now responsible for 3 lives when she still felt she was learning how to breathe again. But as she held them against her chest, all 3 at once, she knew with unshakable certainty that no matter how impossible the road ahead seemed, she would walk it. The years that followed were a lesson in sacrifice and resilience. She learned to live on less sleep than she thought possible, to stretch every dollar further than logic allowed, and to wear a smile even when her heart was breaking from exhaustion. She faced judgment from strangers, whispers from neighbors, and the crushing weight of loneliness that sometimes made her knees buckle. Yet for every challenge, there were small moments of grace. The first time her babies smiled, the first time they spoke her name, the sound of their laughter filling the room like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. And now, 4 years later, Lily was no longer the same fragile woman who had once been cast aside. She was stronger, braver, and carved from resilience. She had raised her children with her own hands, built a life from the ground up, and taught herself to stand tall even when the world tried to press her down. The scars of her past still lingered, but they were no longer wounds, they were proof of her survival. Fate, however, has a way of circling back. On an ordinary afternoon, as she walked with her 3 little ones, their laughter ringing through the air, her path crossed with the very man who had once broken her. Time had only made Daniel Black more powerful, his presence commanding the space around him, his success stamped into every line of his tailored suit. But for the first time in years, when their eyes met, it was not her heart that trembled, it was his. He had left her behind, certain that she was too small a piece for the empire he sought to build. And yet here she was, standing before him, with 3 bright-eyed children who bore the echoes of his features. The world he had built on ambition suddenly shook beneath him, because in that moment he realized what he had thrown away. And Lily, she simply held her children's hands tighter, her chin lifted with the quiet strength of a woman who had walked through fire and emerged unburned. This was no longer the same story of abandonment, it was the story of a return, of resilience, of a mother who had turned heartbreak into the most powerful triumph of all. Daniel Black had always believed he understood control. Boardrooms bent to his will, shareholders leaned forward at his words, and rivals retreated when faced with his relentless determination. But the moment his gaze landed on Lily again, walking hand in hand with 3 children whose features mirrored his own, control slipped through his fingers like sand. For years he had built towers of success, measured his worth in numbers and influence. But in that instant, all of it seemed fragile. He had convinced himself that letting her go was a calculated choice, a necessary step toward greatness. Yet standing before her now, surrounded by the echoes of what he had abandoned, he felt the weight of his decision like a stone pressing against his chest. Lily, however, was not the same woman he remembered. Her presence carried a quiet strength that unsettled him. She did not rush to greet him, did not falter or tremble. Instead, she looked at him with eyes that held both history and distance, as if he were no longer part of her world. The children clung to her hands, laughing and tugging, unaware of the storm brewing in the space between their parents. And in that laughter, Daniel heard something that struck deeper than any business failure could, the sound of joy he had no part in creating. Lily. His voice came out softer than he intended, almost hesitant. He had not planned for this meeting, had not rehearsed words as he did for his speeches. For once, there was no script. She inclined her head politely, her tone measured. Daniel. Nothing more. No accusation, no warmth, just a name spoken with the restraint of someone who no longer expected anything from him. That, somehow, stung more than anger would have. He wanted to ask about the children, but the words caught in his throat. It was impossible to ignore the resemblance, the shape of their eyes, the curve of their smiles, each carried a trace of him. Questions stormed through his mind, but none could be asked without unraveling the truth he had buried for years. The encounter lasted only moments before Lily turned away, guiding the children down the street. Yet those moments branded themselves into Daniel's mind, replaying over and over as if refusing to let him move on. He returned to his world of wealth and glass towers, but everything felt different. His office seemed colder, the silence heavier. He sat through meetings, nodded at proposals, but all he could see was Lily's steady gaze and the 3 small faces that carried pieces of him. He had never known. That night, for the first time in years, Daniel found himself restless. Memories he had long suppressed rose unbidden. The warmth of Lily's laughter, the way she once believed in him without question, the moment he turned his back on her. He had told himself it was for the greater good, that sacrifices were necessary to build the empire he envisioned. But now, looking back, he realized the cost had been greater than he admitted. He had traded love for ambition, and ambition had left him hollow. Lily, on the other hand, went home to a modest apartment where love bloomed in the smallest of ways. The children filled the space with laughter, arguments, and endless questions. She cooked simple meals, helped them with their drawings, and tucked them into bed with stories whispered in the dark. Exhaustion was constant, yet so was joy. Her days were full, her nights long. But there was no emptiness in her life. She had built her own kind of empire, one made not of concrete and power, but of devotion and resilience. Still, seeing Daniel again stirred emotions she thought she had buried. Memories tugged at her, not of betrayal, but of the moments before, the tenderness in his eyes, the way he once spoke of dreams that included her. For a fleeting second, when their eyes met on the street, she had seen something different. Not the cold ambition that had once driven him away, but a flicker of something fragile, almost like regret. She shook it off, unwilling to let herself be drawn into a past that nearly broke her. Her focus was on her children, and nothing would make her waver. But fate has a way of pushing paths together, especially when they seem destined to diverge. Days later, Daniel found himself standing outside the small cafe Lily often visited with her children. He had not intended to follow her, yet something pulled him there, through the window. He saw her laughing with the little ones, her smile brighter than he remembered. He stood there for a long moment, an outsider looking in at a life he had never been brave enough to choose. Inside, Lily sensed a shift in the air. She turned, and there he was, tall, composed, yet strangely uncertain. Their eyes locked, and in that instant, she understood that this was not a chance meeting. He was searching for something, perhaps even redemption. She felt her heart stir, not with longing, but with the ache of unfinished stories. Daniel stepped inside, each movement slower than his usual confident stride. The children looked up, curious, their laughter fading into silence. He met their eyes one by one, his breath catching as if he were looking into mirrors of a past he could not escape. He wanted to speak, to explain, but what words could undo years of absence? What apology could bridge the distance of broken promises? The moment stretched, fragile and heavy. For Lily, this was not just about the man before her, it was about the choice she would make for her children. Would she allow him a place in their lives, or would she shield them from the chaos his presence might bring? Her mind raced, but her heart whispered of caution. The air was thick with unspoken words, and in that silence lay the hook of a new chapter. Neither knew where this fragile reunion would lead, but both understood one thing: their lives would never be the same again. The silence inside the cafe stretched longer than anyone expected. Lily's children stared curiously at the tall man who had just walked in, their innocent eyes searching his face as if trying to understand why their mother suddenly looked so tense. Daniel stood frozen for a moment, his gaze moving from one child to the next, each glance making his throat tighten. He had faced hostile takeovers, ruthless competitors, and rooms filled with men who wanted to see him fail. Yet he had never felt fear like this, the fear of being nothing more than a stranger in the lives that should have been his to know. Lily broke the silence first, her voice calm but firm. "You shouldn't be here." Her tone wasn't sharp, but it carried the weight of boundaries carefully built over years of struggle. She stood as if ready to shield her children, her hand resting protectively on the back of the chair where her youngest sat. Daniel swallowed hard, fighting to find his voice. I didn't plan this. His words faltered. Nothing he could say would sound right. Not when he knew he had forfeited the right to explanations years ago. Still, something inside him refused to leave without trying. "I just wanted to see you, to see them." His eyes flickered toward the children again, his chest tightening as they leaned closer to their mother, sensing her unease. One of the little ones, her eldest, though small for his age, tilted his head and asked, "Mommy, who is he?" The question landed in the space between them like a stone tossed into water, sending ripples through everything unsaid. Lily's lips pressed into a thin line. She had rehearsed this moment in her mind countless times, imagining what she might say if Daniel ever returned. Yet no answer felt right now that the moment was real. "He's someone I used to know," she finally replied, her tone gentle for the children's sake, but her eyes never leaving Daniel's. Her words, though soft, cut sharper than any accusation. "Someone I used to know, nothing more, nothing less." Daniel sat at a table nearby, though. He felt like an intruder in a world that had no place for him. He watched Lily gather her children, their chatter slowly resuming as she distracted them with stories and questions, determined not to let tension touch their innocence. Her strength both humbled and unsettled him. This was not the fragile young woman he had once left behind. This was a mother, a protector, someone who had walked through storms and built light out of shadows. When they finally left the cafe, Daniel remained behind, staring at the empty cups and crumbs on the table they had shared. His chest ached. With the weight of lost years, he realized he could not walk away this time. The life he had built, the empire, the wealth, the power suddenly seemed hollow compared to what he had glimpsed through that window, a home filled with laughter, love, and belonging. He had sacrificed too much, and now he could feel regret settling into his bones like winter cold. Days passed before he dared approach Lily again. He found her outside the school, where she dropped off her children, her face softening as she bent to kiss each of them goodbye. He watched from a distance as the little ones ran inside, their backpacks bouncing with each step. When she turned, their eyes met once more. This time she didn't walk away immediately. She waited, arms folded across her chest, her expression guarded. "Why now?" she asked when he finally stood before her. The question wasn't angry, but heavy with suspicion. Why after all these years? Daniel searched for the truth in himself before answering. "Because I thought I had everything I needed, and I was wrong." He paused, his voice low, raw. "Seeing you again, seeing them, it made me realize what I lost, what I threw away." Her laugh was quiet, bitter but not cruel. "You didn't throw it away, Daniel. You left it. You left me when I needed you most." Her eyes glistened, though she refused to let tears fall. "Do you have any idea what it was like to carry them alone? To bring them into this world without you by my side?" His chest tightened. With shame, he wanted to reach for her, to beg for forgiveness, but he knew it wasn't that simple. Forgiveness was not a gift she owed him. "I can't change what I did," he admitted softly, "but I want to try to be part of their lives. Now, if you let me." Her eyes hardened. "It's not about what you want anymore. It's about what's best for them. And I won't let anyone hurt them, not even you." The tension between them hung like a fragile thread, ready to snap. Yet beneath Lily's words was the spark of something Daniel recognized: fear. Fear of letting him close. Fear of reopening wounds she had spent years healing. But there was also love, unshakable and fierce. The kind of love that had carried her through nights of exhaustion and days of sacrifice. It was that love he would have to face. That love he would have to prove himself worthy of. As Lily turned to leave, Daniel called out after her, his voice trembling, "I'll prove it to you, to them. I'll show you I've changed." She paused, her back still to him, and for a brief second he thought she might turn around. But she didn't. Instead, she walked away, her figure strong and steady against the afternoon sun. Daniel stood there, watching her go, knowing that the battle ahead would not be fought in boardrooms or on balance sheets. This battle would be for trust, for forgiveness, for a place in the hearts of the children who had never known him. And as much as he feared the challenge, for the first time in years, he felt something stronger than ambition, hope. What neither of them realized was that this fragile step forward would test not only their past, but the very limits of their strength. The road ahead was uncertain, full of obstacles and unspoken truths waiting to surface. And yet, in that uncertainty, lay the possibility of redemption, or the certainty of heartbreak all over again. Daniel had always known how to win people over. He could charm investors, outmaneuver competitors, and build alliances that lasted for years. But as he stood across the park watching Lily's children play, he realized this was a different kind of battle, one that couldn't be won with polished words or strategic deals. These three little lives didn't care about his money, his influence, or his reputation. They only cared about the woman who held their hands every day, the mother who tucked them in at night. If he wanted even the smallest place in their world, he would have to prove himself in ways he had never imagined. Lily sat on a bench nearby, her watchful eyes never straying far from her children. She noticed him before he stepped forward, and her heart tightened. Part of her wanted to tell him to leave, to stop trying to slip into the life she had built without him. Yet another part, quieter but persistent, wondered if it was fair to deny her children the chance to know their father. She crossed her arms and waited, unwilling to make this easy. Daniel approached slowly, careful not to startle anyone. The children paused in their game of tag, curious. One of them, the middle child with wide, questioning eyes, whispered something to a sibling. Lily's youngest clutched her leg, sensing the tension. Daniel crouched down a few feet away, lowering himself to their level. He didn't speak right away. Instead, he simply smiled, a little unsure, a little nervous. For the first time in years, his confidence felt stripped away. "Hello," he said softly. His voice, usually commanding, carried an unfamiliar gentleness. "I'm a friend of your mom's." He glanced at Lily, silently asking for permission to say more, but her expression was unreadable. The children studied him with cautious curiosity. Finally, the eldest spoke, bold in the way children often are. "Why are you always looking at us?" The question caught Daniel off guard, but he found himself answering honestly. "Because you remind me of something important, something I lost a long time ago." His gaze lingered on them, his voice thick with sincerity. "And because I think you're very special." The eldest squinted at him, suspicious but intrigued, while the younger two giggled quietly at the idea of being called special by a stranger. Lily remained silent, letting the moment unfold. In the days that followed, Daniel began to appear more often, not in a way that invaded, but in ways that couldn't be ignored. He stopped by the park with ice cream, though he offered it first to Lily, making sure she approved before giving it to the children. He showed up at school events, standing quietly at the back, clapping just as loudly as the other parents. When Lily's car broke down outside the grocery store, he was there within minutes to help. Though she hadn't called him, he had simply been nearby and noticed. At first, Lily resisted. She told herself it was just guilt driving him, that his sudden interest would fade as quickly as it had arrived. But over time, she couldn't deny the small changes. The children began to notice him, too. They asked questions at home. Who was he really? Why did he always look at them like he cared? Why did he make their mom frown and soften at the same time? Lily gave careful answers, protecting them from the truth until she was certain of what role he would play. For Daniel, every small smile, every moment of laughter from the children felt like a victory. Yet he knew he hadn't truly earned anything yet. Winning their trust meant showing up, again and again, not with grand gestures, but with consistency. Something he had failed to give Lily in the past. This time, he was determined not to falter. One afternoon, while walking home from school, the youngest tripped on the sidewalk and scraped her knee. Tears spilled instantly, and Lily bent to comfort her before she could reach for a bandage. Daniel knelt down beside them, his hands steady, as he pulled a small first aid kit from his bag. "May I?" he asked softly. Lily hesitated, then nodded. With careful hands, Daniel cleaned the scrape and covered it with a bandage. He spoke gently, distracting the child with a story about how he once fell off his bike and thought the world was ending, only to discover he was fine. The tears turned into giggles, and soon the child was back on her feet, holding his hand as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Lily watched the scene unfold, her chest tightening. For years she had carried the weight alone, convinced she didn't need him. And she still didn't. She could go on without him if she had to. But seeing him now, kneeling on the pavement, caring for their child with tenderness, made her wonder if perhaps the children deserved this chance. Not for Daniel's sake, not even for hers, but for theirs. Still, doubts gnawed at her. Could a man who had once chosen ambition over love truly change? Was this effort a fleeting attempt at easing his guilt? Or was it real? She couldn't risk letting her guard down, not when her children's hearts were at stake. They had only known stability because she had fought for it. She would not allow anyone, not even their father, to bring chaos into the world she had built for them. Later that evening, after the children were asleep, Lily stood by the window of her apartment, staring at the city lights. Her thoughts churned, tangled with fear and hope. Behind her, a soft knock sounded on the door. She opened it to find Daniel standing there, holding nothing but a nervous expression. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he said quietly, "and I don't expect them to trust me overnight. But I want to try, Lily, every day. I want to try. Please, just give me that chance." His voice carried no arrogance, no demand, only a raw sincerity she hadn't heard from him before. For a long moment, she said nothing, torn between the walls she had built and the possibility of something more. Finally, she whispered, "One chance, that's all." His eyes softened, relief flickering across his face, but even as he nodded, both of them knew this was only the beginning. The road ahead would test every promise, every fear, and every fragile hope they carried. And somewhere in that uncertain path, the question lingered: was redemption truly possible? Or would old wounds reopen when tested by time? The first chance was the most fragile. Daniel understood this as he stood outside Lily's apartment the following morning, holding nothing but a bag of groceries. No flowers, no gifts, no empty apologies, just the small, practical things that might make her day easier. When she opened the door, suspicion flickered in her eyes, but she stepped aside. That simple gesture felt like a door creaking open to a life he had once thrown away. The children were the first to greet him, their voices bubbling with the natural curiosity of youth. "Did you bring us something?" the youngest asked, tugging at the bag in his hand. "Only things for dinner," he replied with a smile. "But if your mom agrees, I can cook for all of you tonight." Lily raised a brow, crossing her arms. "Since when do you cook?" He chuckled softly. "Since I realized I can't buy my way into people's hearts anymore." The honesty in his words surprised even himself. That night, Daniel stood in the small kitchen, sleeves rolled up, awkwardly navigating pots and pans. He was no master chef, but he followed instructions carefully, listening when Lily corrected him, laughing with the children when he nearly spilled the sauce. By the time dinner was served, the meal wasn't perfect, but the table was full of something none of them had expected: laughter shared between all five of them. It was in moments like these that the children began to see him not as a stranger, but as someone who could belong. They started asking him questions about his work, about the places he had traveled, about the stories from his own childhood. He answered each one with patience, weaving tales that made their eyes light up. And for the first time in years, Lily watched her children bond with a man she once loved, her heart aching with both hope and fear. But trust was not built overnight. There were times when the children hesitated, moments when Lily's doubt returned. One evening, the eldest asked her in private, "Mommy, why wasn't he here before?" The question pierced her like a blade. She wanted to protect them from the truth, to shield them from the weight of abandonment. But she also knew that lies could grow heavier over time. She kissed the child's forehead and said softly, "Because sometimes people make mistakes. What matters is whether they try to fix them." Meanwhile, Daniel wrestled with his own demons. Every smile from the children filled him with warmth, but every reminder of the years he missed cut deeper than he could admit. He thought of their first words, their first steps, the nights Lily must have stayed awake with 3 crying infants, the countless milestones he had chosen ambition over. Regret became a constant companion, but so did determination. He vowed never to let those mistakes define the future. As weeks turned into months, Daniel's presence grew steadier. He picked the children up from school when Lily had late shifts, sat with them as they worked on their homework, and even learned the art of braiding hair from an online tutorial, just to see their faces light up in surprise when he managed it, clumsy but heartfelt. Slowly, the walls around Lily's heart began to crack, not from sweet words, but from his actions. Still, the past had not loosened its grip completely. One afternoon, while Lily was at work, an article circulated online about Daniel's company. The headline painted him as ruthless, a man who crushed anyone in his path for profit. The children saw it on a classmate's phone, and questions spilled into the air. When Lily returned home, her eldest asked quietly, "Mommy, is he really like that?" The words cut through her. She had seen both sides of him: the ambitious man who once left her behind, and the changed man who now tucked their children into bed. She didn't know which version would win in the end. That night, she confronted him, the newspaper in her hand. "You're trying to be here for them," she said, her voice trembling. "But are you still the man who left me for success?" Daniel looked at her, his expression heavy with regret. "I was that man once," he admitted, "but I don't want to be anymore." "What good is all of this?" He gestured vaguely toward the city skyline, the empire he had built. "If I have no one to share it with? If I can't even look at my own children without knowing I abandoned them before they took their first breath?" His voice cracked, and for the first time, Lily saw him stripped of all defenses. This wasn't the man who once turned his back on her. This was a man desperate to rewrite the story. Even if it took a lifetime, her silence lingered, heavy and uncertain. But she did not send him away. Instead, she allowed him to stay, to keep trying. Though her heart warned her not to trust too easily, the hook of this fragile new chapter was clear. For every step forward, the past waited like a shadow. Daniel was changing, yes, but could love. And persistence truly erased the scars of abandonment. And more importantly, would Lily ever allow herself to believe in him again? The answer lay not only in what he would do next, but in how deeply he was willing to sacrifice the very ambition that once drove him away. The cold air of early winter brushed against Lily's cheeks as she walked down the quiet street, her children skipping a few steps ahead, their laughter echoing against the walls of old brick buildings. She carried bags of groceries in her hands, her mind still replaying the conversation from the night before. Daniel had spoken with such honesty, such desperation, that for the first time she felt the weight of her anger loosening. And yet, she wasn't ready to trust. Trust was fragile, built from years of steady actions, not just words that sounded sincere. Daniel's efforts had not gone unnoticed. He showed up every single day. He wasn't perfect, and sometimes the children still looked at him with doubt, but he was there helping with school projects, learning bedtime routines, even carrying Lily's burdens when her exhaustion became too heavy. The children had grown used to his presence. They looked for him in the mornings, asked about him at night, and little by little, their bond with him deepened. Lily could see it, feel it, and it terrified her. What if he failed them again? What if the man who had once chosen ambition over love disappeared when life tested him once more? One evening, while the children painted at the kitchen table, Daniel knocked at her door with a heaviness in his eyes. She let him in, her heart already sensing the storm in his silence. He sat down, ran a hand through his dark hair, and finally admitted, "There's something you need to know." Her body tensed. "What is it?" He hesitated, searching for words. "The board wants me to expand the company overseas. They're pushing for it. If I agree, I'll be gone for months at a time, maybe longer." His eyes lifted to hers, full of conflict. "But if I say no, I risk losing everything I've built." Lily's breath caught. This was the moment she had feared, the true test of who he had become. "So, it's happening again," she said quietly, her voice sharp with old wounds. "You'll choose the empire over us." Daniel shook his head quickly, leaning forward. "No, that's just it. I'm not choosing them this time. I came here tonight to tell you I'm ready to walk away from all of it if that's what it takes." The words stunned her. For a man like Daniel, whose entire identity had once been bound to ambition, to say he would give it all up was almost unthinkable. But as she searched his face, she saw no arrogance, no calculation, only sincerity and fear. Fear of losing her again. Fear of losing the children who had finally begun to call him part of their lives. "Do you mean that?" she whispered. "With everything I am," he replied. "I can build another company, another dream, if I need to. But I can't build another family. I can't replace what I lost. I won't risk losing it again." Her heart wavered. For years, she had carried the memory of abandonment like a scar, convinced he would never change. And yet, here he was offering to let go of the very thing that once defined him. But before she could answer, her eldest child walked into the room, clutching a paper covered in crayon drawings. "Mommy, look," the child exclaimed, holding it up proudly. Lily smiled, kneeling to admire the colorful scribbles of a house, a sun, and 5 stick figures holding hands. "That's us," the child explained. "You, me, and the others, and him, too." A small finger pointed at the tallest stick figure. Daniel's throat tightened. "I put him in because he's here now." The simplicity of a child's words pierced through the walls both parents had built. Tears welled in Lily's eyes as she looked at Daniel, who stood frozen, overwhelmed by the innocence of acceptance. That single drawing carried a truth that neither of them could deny. The children wanted him in their lives. But Lily's fears lingered. That night, long after the children were asleep, she stood by the window once more, Daniel beside her. The city stretched out in glittering lights, but it no longer seemed like his kingdom. Instead, it was just a backdrop to a decision that would shape all of their futures. "I want to believe you," she said softly. "I want to believe you've changed. But belief is not enough. I need to see it, not just today, not just tomorrow, but every day you choose to stay. Can you promise me that?" Daniel reached for her hand, his touch gentle but certain. "I don't want to promise, Lily. I want to prove it, for as long as it takes." The final test came sooner than either of them expected. Weeks later, the board issued an ultimatum: accept the overseas expansion or step down. Daniel walked into the meeting, surrounded by men who once admired his ruthlessness, and he shocked them all. Calmly, firmly, he chose to resign. Gasps rippled through the room, disbelief etched on every face. He had walked away from the empire he had built with his own hands, not for failure, but for love. When he returned to Lily's apartment that evening, she could see it in his eyes, the weight of the decision, the relief, the uncertainty of what came next. He no longer carried the armor of a CEO. He was simply Daniel, a man stripped of power but filled with something greater, the courage to put family first. Her heart softened as she whispered, "You really did it." "I told you," he said, his voice trembling. "I don't care about towers and titles anymore. I only care about being here with you, with them." The children rushed to greet him, wrapping their small arms around his legs, and in that moment, Lily knew the choice had been made. He had traded ambition for love, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself to believe it was real, that their story wasn't perfect. The scars of the past would always remain, and the road ahead would still hold challenges. But as they stood together, 5 lives bound by resilience and forgiveness, they understood something powerful. True success was not measured in wealth or influence, but in the love that survived even the deepest wounds. And for Daniel, Lily, and their children, this was not the end, it was the beginning of a new chapter, one written not by ambition, but by the strength of second chances.